The counter-revolutionary traditional Catholic movement is born. Welcome, everybody, to this special report for Kokx News. Today is a turning point in the battle for the faith amid this unprecedented crisis in the history of the Church. Today, we launch out in the face of Trad Inc.'s zip it policy of appeasement, its shameful silence, in exchange for what seems to just be the Latin Mass and nice vestments. Today, we seek to reclaim the traditional Catholic movement from the Tinos, the trads in name only, who for too long have marched under the banner of traditional Catholicism. We do this not willingly or not of our own accord, but out of necessity, given the situation that we find ourselves in now, most especially after the conclave. We do this to, of course, make sure that this fight is a counter-revolutionary one, not one just for the Latin Mass, not one just for to be a side chapel in the conciliar cathedral, but rather to reclaim the Church, the traditional movement, for the one true faith, and to fight for the things that truly matter. That is, of course, the faith as it was practiced before Vatican II and the revolution of the modernist heresies that infected the hierarchy and the conciliar church, the apostate church, that is, that now parades around and calls itself the Catholic Church. Now, before getting into all that today, we have actually a PowerPoint presentation today to go through and kind of simplify all these things. Those of you who know me, I taught at community colleges for over 5 years, and PowerPoint is something that I like to use once in a while when needed. I think today is one of those situations. So, but before getting into all of that, we've been accused and others in this space who are trying to, again, remind the establishment figures in this movement of their duty, of what we were on the same page for the last 12 years, what we were fighting for, calling out heresies, fighting not just for the Latin Mass, but also exposing Vatican II. So we do this not of, again, something that we want to do. It seems to us that, however, given the silence, as our Lord spoke about in the Gospel of Luke, even the stones will cry out. We consider ourselves just one of those little stones. We'll see what the future brings, of course, but we are not here to cause division. We are here to fight the enemies of the Church, and the enemies at the moment are occupying positions of authority in Rome. We know that the squatters who occupy these positions have no right to the positions that they hold. Of course, we cannot fight them effectively if those who claim to be leading this traditional Catholic movement are not willing to expose their errors or call out what's going wrong, or, moreover, proposing false solutions like returning to Vatican II and conservative Catholicism. We'll be going through this again all today. So, in order to understand this, why it's necessary, I want to bring up really quick to the stage a tweet that I put out just a couple of days ago. As we all know, anyone who's been paying attention to the political scene, what everybody should understand is that when Trump ran for office in 2016, he ran on the platform America First. Now, whatever you think of what Trump did or did not do over the last 12 years, 8 years, the message got through. And America First meant destroying the old Republican Party, the Bush-era policies of adventurism overseas, doing whatever Israel wanted. Of course, Trump is sort of doing that now. But in any case, what's going on, thanks to Trump's expanding of the Overton window with this term and his riling up of the Republican Party and forging ahead with this language, everybody knows America First means putting America and prioritizing the United States. What is interestingly still being debated, though, and we just saw this the other week at the National Conservatism Conference in Washington, D.C., which we'll talk about in just a second, is to what extent that term actually only applies to the United States. In other words, there are neocons and evangelicals in the America First movement who will say that America's problems and Israel's problems are one and the same. Therefore, to be America First means also to put Israel right along with it. Well, this is the heart of the issue over what's going on in politics lately. Well, similarly, we see now, again, that the traditional Catholic movement is not doing what it needs to do. Or rather, let us say that we all know that the Latin Mass is a core banner, a cause that all those who support the so-called traditional movement want to see liberalized. They want more priests to be able to offer it. The sort of messy stuff, which we have to have a debate about, is to what extent then is Vatican II part of this movement? Should we eradicate Vatican II? Are those clergy who support Vatican II, should they be called traditionalists, or are they just conservatives? We're talking here specifically about Cardinal Burt, Cardinal Sarah, Cardinal Muller, etc. Or, in order to be a trad, do you have to reject Vatican II? Do you have to support Archbishop Lefebvre? Is the FSSP part of this? These are the things we're going to deal with right now in this show. And again, here to just drive the point home, when Trump ran on America First, many establishment Republicans, Jeb Bush, neoconservatives like Bill Kristol, the Weekly Standard, the National Review, as well as many Catholics who are, at least conciliar Catholics, neoconservative Catholics, who are attached or were attached to that old establishment. We're thinking here explicitly about George Weigel and others in Washington, D.C., who supported the unjust Iraq war. They caused Trump of breaking up the party, of being divisive, of destroying the old alliance that William F. Buckley in the 50s and 60s helped create to propel Ronald Reagan to the presidency. Well, the same thing again is playing out here in the traditional space. Again, we are not causing the division. We are reacting to the silence and the corruption of the traditional movement by those who, for the last 12 years, have done an admirable job, and some even longer, again, who've been born into this movement. We ourselves only came along in 2011. That's when, around the time that I converted to tradition. But again, for too long, it seems to us that Trad Inc. has been promoting the view that being a trad just means supporting the Latin Mass while accepting Vatican II and viewing the apostates in the Vatican as legitimate heirs of the apostles. Today, we declare that it is time to reclaim the traditional Catholic movement for the counter-revolution, the one that is opposed to Vatican II, the movement that we will now see going forward that is opposed to conciliarism, to the fake conservatism that too many are parading around and calling themselves traditionalists. We are drawing a line in the sand today and declaring that to be a trad, one must reject Vatican II and the impostor church that enforces its modernist decrees. This is what we are doing today, and it's what we look forward to, and we hope you will watch. If you want to continue to get videos like this, click that like button, subscribe to us here on YouTube and Rumble, follow myself on Twitter if you want to see more, and also obviously follow us on Substack. All right, so what are we going to be doing today? Well, quite a bit, actually. First, we'll talk about, again, the comparison to the America First movement and how Trad Inc., or the traditional movement, is very similar to what's going on there and why it's necessary. These things happen in movements, okay? We are not, again, causing division. This is a necessary reaction. It's a healthy discussion to be had. We've already seen evidence of this taking place. Anthony Abate of the Avoiding Babylon podcast, he went on and spoke with Kevin Davis and Mario Dirksen. Very good conversation. I very much enjoyed that. Kudos to all those gentlemen. And I'm hoping that more conversations like that will happen. And if anybody out there wants to invite me on their show, happy to come on and discuss. And we'll go from there. But next, we'll look at also the council itself. So we need to understand the radical nature of the council. Again, this is a break. This is the revolution that was instituted in the church, ushered into the church by the neo-modernists like Father Ratzinger, Father Congar, Karl Rahner, de Lubac, and the rest of them, as well as Ratzinger and Wojtyła. Okay, so we want to understand the radical nature of Vatican II and why going back to it, as what seems Cardinal Burke wants us to do, is not a solution. It's not counter-revolutionary. We need to be counter-revolutionaries. We'll also look at, therefore, Archbishop Lefebvre, the founder of the SSPX, and other voices, what they had to say about the council itself. Next, fourthly, we'll look at the history of the traditional Catholic movement for the last 12 years or so, and then also most especially the traditional Catholic movement following the conclave and what's happened and the shifting and the alliances that have seemingly fallen through. And then we'll look at, obviously, where the state of the movement is today. And then lastly, why it's so desperate that we need a new focus for the traditional Catholic movement. Hope that's a good plan for you all today. Hope you're very excited for this. I look forward to being your tour guide today. And let's get started. So first things first, I want to make our attention very, very clear and draw this point out that today's conservatives are actually liberals. All right. Now, what are we talking about? In the church, outside the church, politically, etc. All of the above. All right. So if we think for a second, go back. Again, the church historically has opposed liberalism, the Enlightenment, the post-Christendom world order, as it, again, fights the kingship of Christ. Liberalism, the political world order after the Reformation, the Protestant Revolution, says, among other things, individuals have the right to religious liberty, the right to religious speech, the right to gather, etc., where the church would say error has no rights. Christ is king over society. That's the hallmark of liberal nations, okay? And we see this in the remarks here of Alistair MacIntyre, who was actually he just recently passed, I think within the last 6 months. He was a professor at the University of Notre Dame for a very long time. He said this: contemporary debates within modern political systems are almost exclusively between conservative liberals, liberal liberals, and radical liberals. Okay, so that's the world we're living in. We're not living in the Catholic world order anymore of the great Middle Ages of Christendom, when society and nations knew they had a role to play, a debt to play to God, to honor the social kingship of Christ and to live according to his truths. Liberal political orders came after that, basically roughly after the Peace of Westphalia in the, I think, 1600s, 1500s, around that time, when nations started apostatizing and following Martin Luther. And what we've seen since then is liberal world orders. Okay, this is what we hear from George H.W. Bush in the 1990s and others. When we hear the world order, the new world order, we're talking about a liberal world order. And this is what the two parties are premised upon. So we have here on the left, you'll obviously know who Ocasio-Cortez is. She is a Democrat, right? Progressive, socialist, communist, whatever you want to call her. She's one of those radical liberals that Alistair MacIntyre is talking about. Whereas on the right, you have, any guesses? This is former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Now, he's Republican, right? At least he, in the past, has identified with the party. I think he sort of cooled on everything with Trump. But here he says, I really call myself a classical liberal more than a conservative. Again, the founding generation, the United States founders, were classical liberals. Again, they wanted a limited government. They said free speech, freedom of religion, no established church, separation of church and state came from Jefferson. Of course, the founders had established churches at the state level, but at the national level, Congress could not establish a religion. And liberal political theory holds that the state is instituted out of the needs of the individuals in order to protect the rights of citizens. Okay, it is essentially agnostic on the question of duties of citizens to God and the obligations of communities towards each other, towards a higher power. But the view essentially is that the individual comes together, makes a social contract with others, and institutes these rights to protect their freedoms. Now, this is antagonistic to the Catholic view of a political entity and the purpose of nation. So the Catholic political order says that nations have, again, a debt to God, that the basic building block of society is the family, and that the purpose of a nation is to live virtuously. It's not just to protect rights, as rights will expand into never-ending claims. Again, we are creatures of God. We are bound by certain limits. In other words, we have duties to our family, to our communities, to God, to live in a particular way. Now, how does this relate to what we're going through today? Well, in simple terms, the growth of the LGBT movement and other radical abortion, feminism, etc., is, many argue, the outgrowth of the seeds of the philosophical underpinnings of the liberal political order, right? If everybody is just born with these innate rights to do whatever they want, the freedom to choose whatever, then you can choose to be a man or a woman. You can choose to liberate yourself from your spouse through divorce. Economically, you can choose to work 7 days a week, blaspheme Sunday, do whatever you want, right? Freedom of speech there's no restrictions on any of that. Now, historically, at least in the 20th century, in the 21st century, what happened was we saw the coalition on the political right that President Reagan forged, and Chronicles magazine, which is a sort of old school paleo-conservative magazine, which does cling to the liberalism of the founders, but is a bit more robust in its view that religion, Christianity specifically, has an important role to play, that individuals have a duty to their communities, and that the liberalism of the progressives of the 20th century, like FDR and others, went way off the founding generation's ideas. And so Chronicles has a great article recently written about the three-legged stool around Reagan. And historically, this was founded on the foreign policy of the neoconservative movement. In other words, an aggressive anti-communist policy of so-called spreading democracy, right? Of course, this was mostly run by Jewish Zionists who had interests in using the American military for overseas purposes. Of course, they said it was for spreading democracy and freedom, etc. Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush pursued these policies on the right. The other leg in this stool was the social policy, the cultural issues that was set forth really by the religious right. This was the moral majority of the 1980s with Jerry Falwell and others. Billy Graham. Okay, this was those who set forth the policy for the party at that point. And then the economic policies for the taxing and the spending. This was set forth and allowed by the laissez-faire libertarians, Milton Friedman, as opposed to the Keynesians, those who are more in favor of government intervention in the economy. So this was historically the arrangement on the political right for how the Republican Party was operating. Well, along comes President Trump. Again, what does he say? He wants foreign policy to be America first, right? He doesn't want to go into all these foreign nations. He was very much opposed and fought the war in Iraq. He's made his bones against Jeb Bush during the primary, saying, your brother brought us into a situation where there was no weapons of mass destruction. He lied to the country, etc. So he reclaimed that stool from the Zionists and the globalists in the party. By and large, Trump has been friendly to the religious right. He did appoint judges that overthrew Roe v. Wade. Surprisingly, actually, in his second term here, he's doing some pro-life things. Obviously, Trump ran on allowing abortion. His wife, Melania, said, yes, I'm in favor of abortion. But RFK Jr. is doing some really good things with our HHS right now and studying the dangers of the abortion pill. He's looking into the corrupt practices of the so-called organ donation industry. So, overall, this is what Trump still relies on in some ways. And then lastly, nationalism, economic nationalism. Trump is promoting tariffs. He's trying to bring back jobs to the United States. He reworked the United States agreement with NAFTA, and he was working in his first term to renegotiate bilateral deals, trade deals with other countries, so America would not get ripped off anymore. Again, he wasn't for globalism in the sense that someone like the Bushes were historically in favor of, right? So a global laissez-faire economic order. And you can say this is what caused so many people on the political right, especially Paul Ryan, to shift to the center, or in other words, to go more against what Trump is saying. Again, Trump sort of expanded the Overton window. And who sort of filled this space, or who is? Well, this is the America First movement. Again, this is what's happening in the trad movement right now. Again, there's a vacuum being created by those who are shifting to the left, who are being more silent and going along with the policies that are being set forth in the Vatican. They're being told this by Cardinal Burke, who basically you could say is like the Jeb Bush of the traditional Catholic movement. Again, he's not really a trad in name only. He looks the part, wears all the nice vestments, talks a good game sometimes, still waiting for that fraternal correction. In any case, what's happened on the political right, you've seen the growth of the sort of grassroots America First movement. Now, a lot of these voices, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones. Some people have doubts, are they CIA agents? What is their proper role? Are they gatekeeping? We're not going to get into all that. All I'm going to say is that, look, there is a new sort of Overton window opening up on the political right in the conservative space. And people like Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, again, there's plenty more. These are just some of the most well-known names. They are coming in. And in my view, this mirrors, and we'll talk about this in just a couple slides here, what's happening in the trad movement. You're having voices like Catholic Esquire, Chris Jackson, Mario Dirksen, Louis Vrecchio, these voices, some of whom have been in this space for a long time, but others who have not, who are just reacting to the void that's being left by that silence. And so that's a parallel in the political movement. Again, here is, I think, somebody who understood this very, very well. And I know I'm going on about this, but this is obviously everybody knows Pat Buchanan, right? Catholic, came along under Nixon and was a true America firster, sort of coined the term, not coined the term. The term was coined in the 1920s, I think, by Charles Lindbergh. But here is Buchanan, who again ran for the presidential GOP primary in 1988 against George H.W. Bush. And he ran to reclaim the Republican Party. He ran to reclaim. He didn't say, oh, I know I'm being divisive. Oh, I know I just want George Bush to do the right thing. He ran to reclaim the party, just as is needed right now to reclaim the traditional movement from the Tinos, from the trads in name only. And this is where we take our moorings from. Buchanan did this politically, and I think it's admirable that we now need to do this in the church.
This is an Israeli-occupied territory. Now, what do you mean by that?
I said on the McLaughlin group in response to a question, Jim, they said, do you think that the Congress of the United States will resist this demand for further aid? I said, through a crack I'd heard. I said, no, the Congress of the United States is Israeli-occupied territory. What I meant by that is the most powerful lobby in Washington, which Congress can't stand up to, one of the most powerful, is certainly the pro-Israeli lobby. It has gotten its way in this town year in and year out. And I don't think the automatic votes of the Congress of the United States for $3 and $4 billion worth of aid to Israel are necessarily in the national interest of the United States.
Well, stop it there. But so what's being said here by Buchanan can also be said about the church. The authorities in Rome, the conciliar church, is modernist occupied territory, right? They have no right to be there. They are under the influence and have been since the council, the modernist errors, the homosexual lobby, the Masonic lobby, the Latin Mass lobby. Okay, they are in control, right? And the Latin Mass lobby is essentially what keeps the trads, the true counter-revolutionaries who want to end this occupation, at bay. And we are not being given a fair shake. And so we look to people like Buchanan and his example and say, hey, we want to do the same thing for the church. We're going to reclaim the traditional movement and make sure that it has its eyes set on the prize. Eyes on the prize, and is a counter-revolutionary movement. And the revolution began at Vatican II. All right, so let's advance this slide here forward and talk about that. So imagine this is what the church is. The church is a train barreling down tracks throughout the centuries. And the church has sort of two rails. On the right, you could say conservatism or just tradition, if you will. Those who are orthodox, the church and the popes who have always upheld the faith. And on the left, you could say throughout the centuries, you've had various heretics and dissidents who've risen up. The Arians, those like Martin Luther, the Protestants, they came along and split off to the church to the left, right? So, but the church continues on. It goes forward. Because again, the church is the mystical body of Christ, the bride of Christ, the spotless bride of Christ that cannot lead us astray into error or falsehood. Now, this is important to understand because in the last 250 years, what we have seen, the 200 years, is the church condemn the error of liberalism, the errors of modernism. And we saw this, if you're familiar with history, in the writings of Gregory XVI, who wrote in 1832 in his Mirari Vos encyclical that liberalism, liberal Catholicism is to be condemned. That was in response to French liberals who wanted to make peace with the liberal world, the nation there that said, we will grant you religious liberty, religious freedom. They wanted to say, yes, we will accept that. We will not fight for Christ the King at the federal level. We accept the crumbs of being allowed to simply have our peace, and we'll go from there. Gregory said, no, we're not going to have a free church and a free state. You have to fight for the duty of the state to obligate to recognize the kingship of Christ. Blessed Pius IX also condemned reconciling with the modern world in his encyclical of errors, Syllabus of Errors in 1854. Leo XIII reiterated those condemnations in 1884 with Libertas, that's his encyclical on liberty. He also committed the church to the scholastic thought of Thomas Aquinas at the time. He said, this is the solution to the modern philosophical and theological errors. We have to go back to Aquinas. St. Pius X did the same thing, but he also condemned modernism in 1907, and then Humani Generis by Pius XII is where he condemned in 1950 the new theology, basically the neo-modernist uprising that was being promoted by Schillebeeckx, Yves Congar, and the rest of the neo-modernists who would later run roughshod and run the council itself and ran their coup at that council. And this is all admitted. Okay, we know this is all condemned because here my old boss, Cardinal George from the Archdiocese of Chicago, writes this. He says, formal denunciations of liberalism in whole or part appeared in Pius IX's Syllabus of Errors, in Leo XIII's Immortali Dei, Libertas, Lingua Oceani, and Testem Benevolentiae. So here you have it. Cardinal George, who I imagine many trads think is conservative, or was conservative while he lived. He's not. He's admitting here that, yes, there were formal denunciations that occurred. Okay? Now, keep this in mind as we read this quote. Again, many people think Cardinal Ratzinger, friend of traditionalists, freed the Latin Mass, negotiated with the SSPX, lifted their excommunications. Clearly, he's a trad. Clearly, he's part of our fight for sanity, for tradition. Well, here's some quotes from Father Ratzinger in the past. Quote, the council sought to acquire the best expressed values of 2 centuries of liberal culture and purify them. He said Gaudium et Spes, this is the document from Vatican II, was a revision of Pius IX's Syllabus of Errors. More importantly, in his 1966 book, then Father Ratzinger said that the 100 years before the council and those denunciations that I just listed by St. Pius X and others, he said were excessively one-sided. The church was excessively one-sided in its anti-modernist zeal. In his book, The Theological Highlights of Vatican II, Ratzinger also identified this as the cramped thinking of that period. He said it was so necessary as a line of defense, once necessary as a line of defense. In reality, he said it was a narrow theological outlook that reflected an outmoded negative defensiveness. So here he is sitting in judgment of St. Pius X, saying his writings were cramped thinking, outmoded, narrow, one-sided. I mean, the gall you have to have as someone who, I think at the time, Ratzinger wasn't even 40, to say someone who was just declared a saint, again, is narrow-minded, cramped thinking. I mean, the intellectual pride on display here is off the charts. So if you think Ratzinger and those who support him, who admire him, those cardinals and clergy who look to him as a solution, that's not the solution. Okay? Going back to the council, which again, Ratzinger says here, reconciled the church to the liberal culture, that's not the solution. Now, again, Ratzinger was not alone in his coup. The others, maybe a little more extreme or more outspoken, and wanting to go further with the revolution, are those like Yves Congar. And if you don't know who he is, look him up. A very disreputable figure, admitted in his journal that he urinated on the door of the Holy Office out of protest. This is the sort of petulant, childish man who wrote and had great influence at the council. And in fact, He said this at one point: I am campaigning against the consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary because of the danger that it would constitute for ecumenical relations with non-Catholics. He was driven by a desire to please others. This is what the council itself was eventually, its documents all were permeated with that sort of thinking. It wasn't to uphold the traditions. All the documents that were originally proposed at the council, they were thrown out very, very soon after. Go look up original documents of Vatican II, right? Go look those up. How many people even know there were original documents of Vatican II? All we ever hear was, well, they were juridical, they were closed-minded, etc. That's what the liberal modernist victors like Ratzinger want you to think. Okay, go read them for yourselves. I'll be including them in my upcoming book on Vatican II, What Your Priest Isn't Telling You About Vatican II. So stay tuned for that. And we'll expose how we went from wholly scholastic, entirely traditional, original documents of Vatican II to modernist infused ones that were ambiguous and also weaponized to advance the liberal modernist agenda. But more than this, Bishop Barron, Robert Barron, who many people think is a big conservative, right? He's so traditional. He likes Latin Mass. He loves beauty. Wrong. Here's what he says. Congar was silenced by the Vatican in the 1950s. That's the Holy Spirit right there, right? These imposters, these usurpers, these squatters, okay, they were all silenced by the Vatican before the council. This is the Holy Spirit saying, you're wrong, right? I mean, imagine this today. Someone saying, oh, well, he was just silenced. Well, yeah, that's the church acting, right? Back then. Everything since then has gone now against what the Holy Spirit said, is that no, these modernist ideas that are being promoted by Congar and others, they're to be silenced. Those were blown open at the council, and it opened a Pandora's box, and we've been living with the consequences ever since. But here's what Bishop Barron says. He says, Congar was one of the most influential theologians at the council. His chief opponents were the keepers of the traditional scholastic form of Catholicism. Now, firstly, there's no such thing as a traditional scholastic form of Catholicism. There is only Catholicism, a revealed religion of itself, and then those who want to corrupt it, like Yves Congar, like Ratzinger, like the rest of them, and like those modernists today, who again, Burke and others, insofar as they are following the council, they are following the modernist documents that were written by Congar. Okay, and as Barron here says, Congar's allies were progressive council fathers, Wojtyła, Ratzinger, and he even admits that John Paul had no interest in reviving pre-conciliar conservatism. So really, that just means he had no interest in defending the faith, because that's what it is. That when you deviate from the faith itself, when you flout yourself at the Holy Office itself, as all of these disreputable figures did, you're imposing your own ideology, your own understanding of the faith onto the church. That's what happened at Vatican II. And that's what the conservatives simply want to go back for. But not everybody fell for it. Father Clifford Fenton was what would be today considered a traditionalist, wrote, he was primarily an opponent of Father John Courtney Murray. Father Fenton wrote the American Ecclesiastical Review. He was a Redemptorist. He actually attended the council as a periti or expert of Cardinal Ottaviani. And he said this about the council. He recognized it. He said, the church is going to be very badly hurt by this council. This gathering seems to be entirely liberal. I had always thought this council was dangerous. It was started for no sufficient reason. This is going to mark the end of the Catholic religion. It would seem Christ is abandoning his church. So these are the forgotten voices you don't know about. These are the forgotten conservatives and traditionalists, the real conservatives who wanted to uphold the traditions at Vatican II, who lost out. Okay? So come back to our example here. We'll tie this into why this relates to what we're doing with traditional Catholicism and why we need to reclaim the traditional movement from Trad Inc. All right, so what you could say at the council, again, here's Vatican II. So we come to a head, the train, this church barreling down through history, it comes to Vatican II, and the switch is thrown on the tracks. Boom. And what previously was condemned as liberalism and modernism becomes basically acceptable to believe. And you see on the right here, what was conservative or what was just basic Orthodox Catholic teaching, the faith itself, became branded as traditional and outlawed. And you'll understand that maybe better when I bring up these slides. So Ratzinger, Wojtyła, right? John Paul, Benedict, they were part of the modernist effort to reconcile the church erroneously in the face of over 100 years of condemnations of the reconciling with the modern age, as we see here on the right side. Gregory, Pius IX, Leo. Again, Ratzinger said St. Pius X. The others were cramped thinking. I mean, imagine the gall one has to have to say that. So what happened to tradition then after the council? Where did those who were faithful to the church and want to uphold the faith go? Well, one was Archbishop Lefebvre. And others, obviously, there are others. There are many priests in the United States. Father Fenton, not Father Clifford Fenton, although he was good. There were others too. So he maintained the faith. In 1970, he founded the SSPX. But again, later on, so again, fast forward this to sort of the modern times, we have Bergoglio, who again is the most radical explanation, or rather the most radical expression of the council. Again, he's even further to the left than John Paul and Ratzinger. And again, now today we have Prevost Leo, who is building on and cementing the Bergoglian legacy of synodality. He's still allowing the gay blessings to continue. He's repeatedly talking about our common home, right? The Mass for Care of Creation. He's promoting women to the dicasteries in the Vatican. And again, he's advancing the synthesis. He's synthesizing basically the outward experience, the outward appearance of Benedict with the radical policies of Francis, which makes him very, very dangerous. Okay, and the liberals will admit this. The dissident so-called Catholics, Michael Sean Winters, he writes for the National Catholic Register, or rather the Reporter, which is not Catholic. He said at one time, quote, many of the ideas St. Pius X railed against would become standard theology by the time of Vatican II. So again, the switch on the tracks has been pulled. So they mock and dance on the grave of St. Pius X and all of the infallible, ordinary, universal magisterium taught by those popes for over 200 years. And what do we hear from Cardinal George, a conservative who was friends with Cardinal Burke, formerly of Chicago? The church, he says, is indebted to the early liberal Catholics of the 19th century. Says everything. Says everything. It's because these men are not conservatives. They are liberals. They are with the revolution. Cardinal Burke, Cardinal George, they do not want to be counter-revolutionaries. Simple as that. So, at the same time, though, there has been growth in the counter-revolutionary movement. Again, Archbishop Lefebvre founded the SSPX in 1970. Archbishop Viganò has taken up that mantle in 2023, founding Ex Surge Domine. And others have as well. Bishop Sanborn, other Sedevacantist clergy who saw this and have done a great effort to ensure priests are trained and are fighting this revolution of Vatican II. So let's sort of tie this into the trad movement today and explain further why, again, just going back to the council is not the answer. I want to first draw your attention to this Substack post by Radical Fidelity. And if you can, go on there and read it. I reposted it on there, restacked it on there. And he said this: traditional Catholicism stands as a living counter-revolution against these forces. It battles external threats, liberalism, secularism, communism, while confronting internal challenges from modernism and progressivism. Exactly what we're talking about. This counter-revolutionary stance encompasses multiple spheres: maintaining doctrinal fidelity, upholding liturgical continuity with the traditional Mass, which embodies, he notes, importantly, hierarchy, mystery, sacrificial worship. And he also talks about moral integrity against attacks on sexuality, family, etc. So this is our fight. We have to see Vatican II as the church's appeasement of the modern world. And as such, it cannot be part of our solution. We must oppose the council. You cannot be a traditionalist if you accept the council, or you want to just simply say, well, we'll correct some of the errors. It wasn't such a bad council. It was misunderstood. No, it was a coup carried out by dissidents who were officially censored by the Roman authorities, by the voice of the Holy Spirit in Rome before the council. Okay. So if you're going to go with Vatican II, you have to defend those figures, okay, and how they ran their coup at the council. This is why, to bring up, to sort of get us to remind us, when Lefebvre said in 1990, this is a Substack taken from the Catholic Esquire. This is a quote from Lefebvre himself. Certainly, the question of the liturgy and the sacraments is important. We all know that, right? The traditional movement, so-called, has always fought for the liberalization of the Latin Mass. But Lefebvre says it is not the most important. The most important question is the question of the faith. This question is unresolved in Rome. For us, however, he says, it is resolved. We have the faith of all time, the faith of the Catechism of the Council of Trent, etc. Now, he says, the official church is preserving, we might say pertinaciously, in the false ideas and grave errors of Vatican II. That much is clear. So, this is the dividing line. It's the line in the sand. And when Lefebvre was excommunicated in 1988, that was the choice. God gave everybody to say, hey, whose side am I on? Am I on the side of John Paul II? Am I on the side of Ratzinger, who was trying to negotiate with Lefebvre in the 80s? Or am I on the side of truth and willing to be excommunicated from this false church? That's the line that not all these trads are taking. They're not going across it. They want to stay in the conciliar pantheon, right? They want to have their side chapel, the Institute of Christ the King, the FSSP, the Institute of the Good Shepherd, the Diocese of Campos. Okay, these are all communities that have struck a deal. Dom Gerard of Les Barreaux, he was, I believe, a Benedictine who was friends with Archbishop Lefebvre in the 1980s, and then in the early 1990s struck a deal. Maybe even 1988, I can't remember. But they said, Dom Gerard, Father Gerard, just sign a deal with us. We won't say that you have to adopt all the principles of Vatican II. We'll even give you the old Mass. You'll be free, left as you are. But Lefebvre called that a treasonous move. He said he betrayed him. And so that's why Lefebvre was so staunch on, at least in the later years, because again, in the 80s, he definitely did try to reconcile with this institution. But after 88, his most mature thought on the matter seems to me that he said no. And we know that because, again, here's what he said in 1988. He said, we do not have the same outlook on a reconciliation. Cardinal Ratzinger sees this as bringing us back to Vatican II. We see it as a return to tradition. We don't agree. It's a dialogue of death, he says. Supposing Rome calls for a renewed dialogue, I will put conditions. I will place the discussions at the doctrinal level. He said, I will ask them, are you in full communion with these popes and their full teachings? He's talking about the Syllabus of Errors, Pius IX, Libertas of Leo, St. Pius X. If you do not accept the doctrines of your predecessors, it is useless to talk. It is useless to talk. So, again, Lefebvre well understood that. And he also understood the trickery being used by those in Rome. And he said this not long after the consecrations. He said, what looks like a concession is in reality merely a maneuver to separate us from the largest number of faithful possible. This is the perspective in which they seem to always be giving a little more and even going very far. We must convince our faithful that it is no more than a maneuver. It is dangerous to put oneself into the hands of conciliar bishops. If we have struggled for 20 years to avoid the conciliar errors, it was not in order now to put ourselves in the hands of these professing these errors. So this is him basically saying we do not negotiate with terrorists. These are occupying powers who do not have legitimacy. He's saying, no, we will not accept union with them. They have to come back to the traditional doctrines, the traditional faith itself. And this is what the trad movement has lost. This is what you get when you have people who are not trads, who are not counter-revolutionaries leading this fight. Again, Michael Matt likes to say he was confirmed by Lefebvre. It doesn't even go to SSPX. Okay? Many others in this so-called fight, they just fall into Latin Massism. We'll talk about why that's wrong in just a second. But to drive home this point, again, this needs to be what the trad movement is all about, against the imposters in Vatican, the squatters who have no rights to be there. This is a sermon from Bishop Tissier de Mallaré of the SSPX in the mid-2010s. And we'll slow it down. This is what he said about the situation.
Third point, we will apply what Archbishop Lefebvre himself, Archbishop Lefebvre, our venerated founder, wrote in his spiritual journey, a book that I encourage you to read. The last book he wrote before his death, his spiritual journey, that is, as he used to say, his spiritual testament. What Archbishop Lefebvre wrote for us in 1990, for us as a spiritual testament, I quote him, it is a strict duty for every priest. It is a strict duty for any priest who will to remain Catholic to separate off from the conciliar church, as long as she does not recover the tradition of the magisterium of the church and of the Catholic faith. These are the words of our founder. I repeat, it is a strict duty for any priest who will to remain Catholic to separate off from the conciliar church, the so-called conciliar church.
Now, this is a very powerful sermon, and in fact, it's one that Bishop Tissier also said. Society, I'll bring this up. This is on our Substack. He says, let us reject, he says, the wrong supposition of some of our friends, bad friends, who say that SSPX is now in an abnormal situation because we are not acknowledged by the church. The SSPX must come back to the normal situation and receive a canonical status from Rome. He says that is wrong. We are not abnormal. The situation that is abnormal is in Rome. They must come back. That's how many times from so-called the trad movement, people in this movement, who again, many of them don't even go to the Latin Mass or the SSPX, that the SSPX must be regularized. We just saw this with the entire situation of their pilgrimage back to Rome, right? And everybody says, "Oh, we're so back, or we're coming back." Well, Lefebvre said, "No, we don't need to be under the illusion of being on our own, of being put out of the regularization of canonical status." He said, "We have the faith," and this goes for all trads, right? Who are truly traditional, wherever you're at. Okay, if you're a SEDE, if you're SSPX, or if you're independent resistance, do not be afraid. Bishop Lefebvre said, of going on your own, so to speak, because you have the faith. And Tissier here in his sermon basically says, you are in the church. We are in the church. We have nothing to regularize. They need to come back. And this is the problem with the trad movement. They don't understand the situation. So again, here's where the trad movement basically was, the so-called trad movement, after the council, or after the conclave, before the conclave, excuse me, under Bergoglio. Those on the right were the ones who were sounding the alarm the most, perhaps, being the most traditional-minded. Infiltration book written by Taylor Marshall, Michael Matt, The Remnant, Kennedy Hall, well-known SSPX guy, Archbishop Vigano sounding the alarm, very, very strong. And on the far left, you had, we just want our Latin Mass. These are the voices that were pushing that messaging. Well, this all changed right after the conclave. What you saw was a big shift to the left. Everybody was saying, hold your breath, don't freak out, give them time, let's have hope, let's be optimistic, or just be quiet for now, zip it, as Michael Matt said recently, and see what happens. So everybody just became moderates, just as we talked about earlier, under the Trump administration, right? We had Jeb Bush, everybody else, Paul Ryan moved to the center. They said, "Oh, Trump's causing division. We're gonna not be so critical. We're gonna jump to the left, and basically we're gonna be." I think George Bush. I think he said he might have even voted for Hillary Clinton or something. So a lot of these guys left the Republican Party. Okay, and again, the same thing sort of happens here. This leaves a void. Who's speaking out then? Okay. If nobody else is, well, here's what's happened. Again, this is where the term Trad Inc. was invoked, and where the new counter-revolutionary traditional Catholic movement comes into play. And this is why Chris Jackson wrote How to Tell If You're Trad Inc., calling out a lot of these figures. He said, if you've published 10 articles on Francis lying about Traditionalist Custodes, but not one on Leo smiling in a White Sox hat as a TLM is banned, you might be trad Inc. If 2 months in, you are still not sure what to think about Leo after condemning Francis as soon as he was elected, you might be trad Inc. If you think Leo saying Mass ad orientem is a sign of hope, but fail to mention Francis did the same thing, you might be trad Inc. So you can read that. I presume if you've gotten this far, kind of know what we're talking about here. But let's go back. So who's filling this void? This is a legitimate thing. Like, who's this new movement on the right? Who's for really the traditional movement first, right? Just like in the America First movement, there are new voices popping up. So are there also new voices in this space emerging. And who are they? Well, you know them because you've been watching this show and paying attention. Chris Jackson is definitely one. Canon 212, Frank Walker has survived this battle. He's been speaking out as well. Nova Sardo Watch, Mario Dirksen, Father Nix, Liz York came on our show, Dr. Mazza, Catholic Esquire, Louis Vrecchio, Kevin Davis, all these other persons who have been doing a great job and a great service to the situation at hand. And I wrote about this actually for the Substack, Alternative Trad Media Cannot Be Stopped. And, you know, this is all emerging. This is just what's happening as a reaction. And I've mentioned some of those people who I think are in this fight right now. Archbishop Vigano, Chris Jackson, WM Review, Dr. Deep State, Frank Wright, Frank Walker, Catholic Family News, Catholic Family Podcast, Bishop Sanborn, Dave Riley, so many others too that I have not mentioned on here who are doing great work. Don't take offense at that. I just haven't had time to update all this. But this is the future of it, and why we say this is the nature of the battle. And we need to remember that we're not just in this for the Latin Mass. And we'll close in a few minutes. Thanks for sticking with us again. If you like this show, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our Substack, click that like button on YouTube and Rumble. If you're really appreciative, send us a super thanks. We're always grateful for those. But let's return now before we close the show and make our strongest statement yet as to where this movement needs to go. Let's recall again that it was the three-legged stool of the Reagan coalition that really held the Republican Party and the conservative so-called movement together. Neoconservatism, religious social policies, social conservatives, and libertarian economic argument. Well, let's update this to a five-legged stool that the traditional movement had become under Francis. And as far as I can tell, there were five sort of policies that the movement itself had sort of adopted. The clergy policy, the Pope policy, the Mass policy, the Vatican II policy, and the Sedevacantis policy. Now, what are those? Well, who were the clergy who were being upheld by the biggest voices in the so-called trad movement? Well, many of them were not trads. They were just simply conservatives. You saw Bishop Strickland become America's bishop. You had Bishop Schneider, who again is not a trad, just a conservative, wants to go back to Vatican II, correct the errors, supports ecumenism, has done ecumenical interreligious things himself. But you also have, at one point, Archbishop Vigano went on EWTN, was held up at the Catholic Identity Conference, was very much supported by Trad Inc. So that was something that they were willing to support. Second, the Pope policy. I mean, there were letters coming out almost every day denouncing Bergoglio as a heretic. Is he a formal heretic, a material heretic? What do we do about this? Rurate Celi, Dr. Kwasniewski, people calling him to resign. These things were like an ordinary Tuesday under Bergoglio. And oddly enough, obviously this has not happened under Leo, even though Leo is continuing every policy that Bergoglio set in action. Third, what was the trad movement under Bergoglio? The Mass policy, again, extraordinary form. We just want the extraordinary form of the Mass. We want to parade around the Latin Mass, have it more normalized, liberalized. We want to go back to the era of Benedict. The Vatican II policy, well, everybody was saying, again, let's just clarify the eras of Vatican II. Vatican II was a failed council. It tried some things. It didn't work. Let's just go back. It wasn't a coup. It wasn't a revolution in the church, but it was something that just went wrong, and we need to correct those errors. That's the attitude of the trad so-called movement. And then lastly, the Sedevacanist policy. No, no, they're not invited. No Mario Dirksen at the Catholic Identity Conference. No, none of these clergy are invited to come on at all. It's too far to the right. That's what it was. All right. And then here comes Leo. And what do we get? Within the last 4 or 5 months, you only see Trad Inc. support the conservatives, right? Bishop Strickland is still held in high esteem. Cardinal Burke is now firmly in command of this. We just saw the other day that Cardinal Burke is not going to have a Latin Mass said himself, offer it at the chair of St. Peter in the Vatican. The Pope policy when it comes to criticizing Leo, just zip it. Zip it for now. A policy of appeasement. We'll keep it quiet. We'll let Burke, who never delivered on the fraternal correction, be our guide. Just trust him. He'll solve everything. Then the other policies, the Mass, the Vatican II, and Sedevacantists, that's still continued. Okay. Now, what is needed is a big change here. This is where we will now go forward for the counter-revolutionary traditional movement. What are we going to do? We are going to support traditionalists only, because traditional clergy understand this fight. They understand the solution. They understand its problems. Okay. We're not going to be holding up those who are following in the footsteps of Ratzinger, those who want to just simply go back to the council. No, if those want to come on board, those conservatives who like the Latin Mass, if they want to learn more and understand the dangers and the real harm of the council, all right, welcome aboard. We're happy to have you. We're happy to have discussions and have these things out in the open. But keep coming, and this is where we need to go. So the second, the Pope policy, expose and rebuke Leo Prevost, just like what was happening under the Leo, or rather the Francis regime. Public letters, denouncements, and this includes everything that's been going on for the last 4 or 5 months, right? It's not just the things that are extremely obviously offensive, like the James Martin LGBT pilgrimage. It's everything else. It's referring to this earth as our common home. It's exposing and denouncing his social justice statements that are just general and are obviously just not inherently Catholic, right? Just general statements about living a happy life and sharing your gifts. Well, no, we want doctrine. We need to hear the 4 last things. We want to hear Catholic sermons from Prevost. Again, we need to have statements saying, no, our common home is in heaven, right? We need to have we need to denounce synodality. We need to denounce ecumenism. These meetings with the Orthodox and the Lutheran bishops and how he's praising all of them. This does not fly. This is of itself scandalous. It's the highest office in the world, the papacy, the office itself. You're not just a math teacher. When that person who is walking around in those white vestments, using that office and is not defending the glory of God, defending the Catholic teachings, and instead is imposing modernism and using that and parading that around as if that is the Catholic faith, that is scandalous, a grave offense against God. And as Aquinas said, the corruption of the best is the worst. So again, this is no small matter. Each one of these things infuriates God. What is our policy on the Latin Mass? Well, Latin Mass only. Okay. And we know that because the Novus Ordo is corrupt. It's Bunini, who was a Mason, in all likelihood, who invented that. This Montinian rite that diminishes the faith over time of those who go to it and is a Masonic tribute. We do not want anything to do with the Novus Ordo Mass. Its calendar, its kosher calendar that removed saints that were controversial and unacceptable to Jews and others. We do not accept that as a valid Mass. We want the Latin Mass only, not the extraordinary form. We only want the Latin Mass, traditional Latin Mass. Next, Vatican II. We do not accept Vatican II and its errors. We reject it entirely. It is a corruption of the faith. It is not a failed council. It is a coup, a revolution that changed the countenance of the face of the church itself, right? We see it as a modernist revolution, a complete rejection, as we said earlier, of the faith itself. It was where, again, folks like Ratzinger, de Lubac, Congar, and others completely rewrote and imposed their own ideology and passed it off as Catholic. We do not accept going back to Vatican II as a solution. And then lastly, when it comes to Sedevacantists, we are all for welcoming persons of that persuasion to this movement, because we realize this is a confusing time and our goal needs to have all hands on deck. We need to be open to all ideas and to have a wide swath of persons who see the crisis for what it is and are able to identify what is really going on here. And that is where we will go moving forward. So 5 points moving forward for the counter-revolutionary traditional Catholic movement. We are not going to simply sit here like Oliver Twist, begging for scraps. Tradition has all the rights. These modernists do not have any right to be where they are. They are usurpers. We are not going to beg for crumbs. Again, the issue is they need to come back to doctrine. As Lefebvre himself said, the issue is going to have, if we go there, we're going to have a dialogue of doctrine. Do you accept Pius X, Blessed Pius IX, St. Pius X, Pius XII, etc.? We are not going to beg for crumbs. We are not going to be a side chapel any longer. Our fight is for the faith itself. So we are not dividing Trisham. We are not here to cause problems. Many of these persons in this so-called movement are not traditional. They don't even attend the SSPX. They go to adult communities just ready to be a side chapel under modernist usurpers who have no authority to tell them or tell us what to do. So this is the battle we have to take on. And again, this was a pivotal explanation Archbishop Vigano said recently in a statement. Again, there's this Latin Mass going on St. Peter's. Everyone's really excited. Again, the news that dropped on just a couple of days ago, actually on Sunday, right after the big kerfuffle over the LGBT pilgrimage. Obviously, this news was coordinated. Obviously, Roraticelli, Ed Pentum, Diane Mantegna, all the other biggest so-called journalists of the Cardinal Burke and his allies dropped this news on Sunday to distract all of us from the scandal that was caused from the LGBT pilgrimage. In any case, I wrote this. I said, these liturgies are like plant-based meat. Okay, it looks the same, smells the same, but it's not the real thing. And here's why Vigano is so spot on and why they fear Vigano in the so-called fake trad movement. He says, this is an operation of designification of the liturgy, which consists in being recognized with the right to celebrate the traditional Mass on the condition the celebrant does not accept the doctrinal and moral implications of that right. Okay, he understands, in other words, that the situation is that our battle is not just to be a side chapel. And he said this in his other statement as well, which again is essential. The unwritten contract between conservatives and the post-Bergoglian hierarchy, I think he understands, obviously this is all coming from Vatican II, stipulates that the liturgical preferences of a group of clerics and faithful can be tolerated if and only if they refrain from highlighting the alienation between the ecclesiology and the entire doctrinal framework underlying the Latin Mass and those expressed in the Reformed Montanian rite. So His Excellency is making note here that this is not acceptable. He says here further, the deception is twofold. This is why you cannot go with the attitude of the conservatives. This deception is twofold, he says. Above all else, because of a much worse trap. And what is that trap? It consists in accepting, at least implicitly, the forced, unnatural, and impossible separation between the ceremonial form of the rite and its doctrinal substance. So again, that is the crisis itself. This is something that Trad Inc. does not understand. They just want the Latin Mass separated from the actual faith itself, the counter-revolutionary faith itself that the Latin Mass stands for. So this is our goal. This is our plan moving forward. It's not just a fight for the Latin Mass. It's a fight for the faith itself, the pre-Vatican II faith. You cannot be a trad if you're following Vatican II. Okay, we have to go back to the pre-modernist free Catholic religion and to maintain that faith. And it's not just, again, for the Latin Mass. It's in everything. In future episodes on this program, I will have people talking about creation, talking about biblical modernism, talking about ecumenism, talking about religious liberty and dignitatis humanae, the Vatican Council II's document on religious liberty. We'll talk about the Catholic land movement. We'll talk about technology, because we're not just fighting for the Latin Mass. We're fighting for the entire faith itself. And that means undoing everything at the council. That's our goal. Nothing less should be our goal. So thank you for tuning in, everybody. This was our important episode for today. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you'll join us in the counter-revolution, the true traditional movement going forward. I know it was a long episode today, but there's a lot mirroring what's going on in the church and in politics right now. So we are trying to reclaim the name Traditional Catholic from those who are not Traditional Catholic, traditional in name only, and are not fighting the battles that need to be fought, that were being fought somewhat under Francis, but now that we're in a new era, seemingly some sort of spell has been cast over everybody. We are moving forward with our agenda. We are pushing forward to be a modernist-free church, because God has a right to not have modernists in charge of his church. So we fight for the glory of God and for the restoration of the church itself to its rightful place in the Vatican. So thank you for watching today, everybody. May God bless you, and take care.